They thought I was old and stupid. My only son sold my $1 million apartment and handed me a $10,000 check, so I'd disappear into some cheap little room. But I'm not someone you can throw away like an old thing. That day began something he would never forget. I stayed silent until I struck a blow that tore their greed to pieces. My name is Jacqueline, and at 58 years old, I thought I knew everything about betrayal. I was wrong. The deepest cut always comes from those closest to your heart. Let me take you back to where it all began. I wasn't born into privilege or handed anything on a silver platter. My childhood was a series of hand-me-downs, shared bedrooms, and parents who worked 3 jobs between them just to keep food on the table. I learned early that if you wanted something in this life, you had to fight for it. When I met Freddie at 22, I was working double shifts at a diner while taking night classes in business administration. He was a carpenter with calloused hands and dreams bigger than his paycheck. We were both scraping by, but we had something more valuable than money. We had each other and an unshakable belief that we could build something better together. Our first apartment was a cramped studio above a laundromat. The washing machines would shake our floor at all hours, and the smell of detergent was permanently embedded in our clothes. But it was ours. Every morning, Freddie would kiss me goodbye and head to construction sites across the city, while I managed the books for small businesses that couldn't afford proper accountants. Jackie, he'd say, holding my face in his rough hands, we're not just surviving. We're building something. Every dollar we save, every sacrifice we make, it's all going somewhere important. He was right. By the time our son Leo was born 3 years later, we had saved enough to put a down payment on a small house in Queens. Nothing fancy, but it had a yard where our baby could play and rooms we could actually close doors in. I remember the day we got the keys. Freddie lifted me up and spun me around in the empty living room while Leo gurgled in his carrier. "This is just the beginning, Jackie," Freddie whispered in my ear. "Someday, we'll have enough to give Leo everything we never had." Those early years were beautiful in their simplicity. Freddie's carpentry business started growing as word spread about his craftsmanship. I expanded my bookkeeping services and began helping small businesses with their tax preparation. We worked constantly, but we worked together, building towards something bigger. Leo was our world. Every decision we made was filtered through one question: will this help our son have a better life? We saved for his college fund before we bought new furniture. We chose generic groceries so we could afford music lessons when he showed interest in piano. We drove old cars and wore clothes until they fell apart, but Leo always had the best we could provide. When Leo was 8, Freddie came home one evening with an unusual gleam in his eye. He'd been hired to renovate a beautiful apartment building in Manhattan, the kind of place we'd only seen in movies. The owner was impressed with Freddie's work and offered him a deal. In exchange for managing the building's maintenance and renovations, we could buy one of the apartments at a significantly reduced price. "It's in Manhattan, Jackie," Freddie said, spreading the building plans across our kitchen table. "Real Manhattan. The kind of place where property values just keep going up. If we can make this work, if we can sacrifice for just a few more years, we'll have something really valuable to pass down to Leo." The apartment was everything we dreamed of. High ceilings, hardwood floors, windows that looked out over the city we'd called home our entire lives. It was also expensive. Even with the discount, it would stretch our finances to the breaking point. We'd have to give up almost every comfort, work even more hours, and live like monks for years to make the payments. But we did it. For Leo, we did it. The next 5 years were the hardest of our lives. I took on more clients, working from dawn until midnight. Freddie's business expanded to include 3 other buildings, and he was constantly on call for repairs and renovations. We rarely saw each other awake, passing like ships in the night as one of us came home while the other was leaving for work. But slowly, methodically, we built something extraordinary. The apartment's value increased year after year. Freddie's business became one of the most respected property management companies in the city. My accounting firm grew to serve over 50 small businesses. We were successful, truly successful, for the first time in our lives. Leo thrived in this environment. He attended one of the best schools in the city, participated in every extracurricular activity that interested him, and never had to worry about money the way Freddie and I had as children. He was brilliant, charming, and had inherited his father's work ethic and my head for numbers. "You're raising a good boy," Freddie would say, watching Leo practice piano or work on his homework. "He's going to do great things." Everything changed when Leo was 16. Freddie had been complaining about chest pains for weeks, but like most men of his generation, he insisted it was just stress and overwork. I begged him to see a doctor, but he kept putting it off, saying the business was too busy and he couldn't afford to take time off. The heart attack happened on a Tuesday morning. I was at my office when the hospital called. By the time I got there, he was gone. 51 years old, and gone. Just like that, the man who had built everything with me was no longer there to share it. The funeral was packed with clients, friends, and colleagues whose lives Freddie had touched. Person after person told me stories about his kindness, his integrity, his skill. But all I could think about was how quiet our apartment felt without his laughter echoing through the rooms. Leo was devastated. He'd worshipped his father, and losing him so suddenly shattered something inside my son. I watched him retreat into himself, becoming quieter, more serious. The carefree teenager who used to joke with his father about everything disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed to be carrying the weight of the world. "It's just us now, Mom," he said one evening, sitting in Freddie's favorite chair. "I need to step up and help you with everything." I was proud of his maturity, but I was also worried. At 16, he shouldn't have felt responsible for taking care of me. But grief affects everyone differently, and I thought time would help him find his way back to being a kid again. I threw myself into work, partially to distract from the loss but also because I now had to manage both my accounting business and Freddie's property management company. The apartment in Manhattan, our dream home, felt too big and too empty without him. But I couldn't bear to leave it. It was filled with memories of our life together, and leaving felt like abandoning him all over again. Leo finished high school with top grades and was accepted to Columbia University on a partial scholarship. We could easily afford the remaining tuition, and I was proud to write those checks. This was what Freddie and I had worked for, giving our son opportunities we'd never had. "Your father would be so proud," I told him at his graduation. "You're everything he dreamed you'd become." Leo hugged me tightly that day. "I'm going to make you both proud, Mom. I promise." And he did, for a while. He excelled in college, studying business administration and finance. He was charismatic and smart, making connections that would serve him well in his career. During his junior year, he met Victoria, a beautiful young woman from a wealthy family who was studying art history. I should have paid more attention to the warning signs then. Victoria was polite enough when I met her, but there was something calculating in her eyes. She asked a lot of questions about our finances, our property, our plans for the future. Questions that seemed inappropriate for someone who was supposedly just dating my son. "She's ambitious," Leo said when I gently expressed my concerns. "She wants to make sure I'm serious about my future." I think that's a good thing. Maybe it was. Or maybe I was just lonely and overprotective. After Freddie's death, Leo was all I had left, and I didn't want to do anything that might push him away. So I kept my reservations to myself and welcomed Victoria into our family. They married right after graduation in a beautiful ceremony that Victoria's family paid for. I was grateful for their generosity, but I also felt a subtle shift in how they treated me. I was no longer the successful businesswoman who had built something from nothing. I was the mother-in-law who needed to be managed. Leo started working at Victoria's father's investment firm, and they moved into a beautiful apartment that her family helped them purchase. I was happy for them, but I also felt increasingly distant from my son. Our weekly dinners became monthly phone calls, which eventually became occasional text messages. They're building their own life, I told myself. This is what's supposed to happen. But something felt wrong. Leo seemed different, more materialistic, more focused on status symbols and social climbing. The boy who had once been content with simple pleasures now needed the best of everything. Victoria's influence, I suspected, but I kept my opinions to myself. When Leo was 28, he came to me with a proposal that would change everything. "Mom," he said, sitting across from me in the apartment where he'd grown up, "Victoria and I have been talking, and we think it would be smart to consolidate our family's assets. You're getting older, and managing all these properties and businesses is a lot of work. What if I took over the day-to-day operations?" It made sense, in a way. I was 55 and had been working non-stop for over 30 years. The idea of having help, of sharing the burden with someone I trusted completely, was appealing. Leo was smart, educated, and had been working in finance for several years. Who better to help manage the wealth that Freddie and I had built? "I'm not ready to retire completely," I said carefully. "But I suppose having some help would be nice." "Of course not," Leo said quickly. "I'm not talking about you stepping down entirely. I'm talking about us working together, like you and Dad did. A partnership." The word partnership sealed it for me. That's what Freddie and I had, a true partnership where we made decisions together and shared both the work and the rewards. If Leo wanted that same kind of relationship, I was ready to give it to him. We spent the next few months restructuring everything. Leo convinced me to add his name to most of the bank accounts, to give him power of attorney for certain business decisions, and to put him on the deed for the Manhattan apartment. It was all presented as practical estate planning, making things easier for both of us. "This way, if anything happens to you, everything will transfer smoothly without going through probate," he explained. "And if anything happens to me, you still have full control. It's just a safety net." I trusted him completely. He was my son, my only child, the person I devoted my life to protecting and providing for. The idea that he might use that trust against me never crossed my mind. For the first year, everything worked beautifully. Leo took over much of the day-to-day management of the properties, and I focused on the accounting business that I genuinely enjoyed. We talked regularly about investments and decisions, and I felt like we were truly working together. But gradually, I began to notice changes. Leo would make decisions without consulting me, then tell me about them after the fact. He'd explain them as small operational issues that didn't require my input, but they were becoming more frequent and more significant. "I'm just trying to be efficient," he'd say when I questioned him. "I didn't want to bother you with minor details. I should have put my foot down then. I should have demanded to be included in every decision, should have maintained tighter control over the accounts. But I was tired, and I wanted to trust my son. After losing Freddie, Leo was all I had left, and I couldn't bear the thought of creating conflict between us. Victoria's influence became more obvious as time went on. She'd make comments about my outdated business practices, my old-fashioned approach to money management. She'd suggest that Leo was carrying too much of the burden, and that I should let him have more authority to make the changes that needed to be made. "She's just trying to support her husband," I told myself. That's what a good wife does. But the comments stung, especially because they came during family dinners where I was supposed to feel welcomed and loved. Instead, I increasingly felt like an outsider in my own family, someone whose opinions were outdated and whose presence was barely tolerated. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday in March. Leo called me and asked if we could meet for lunch. He sounded strange on the phone, nervous, almost guilty. I agreed to meet him at a restaurant near my office, thinking he might want to discuss some business matter privately. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a folder of papers in front of him. He looked handsome in his expensive suit, but there was something cold in his eyes that I'd never seen before. "Mom," he said, barely waiting for me to sit down, "Victoria and I have been doing some financial planning, and we think it's time to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though something in his tone made my stomach clench. "The apartment in Manhattan," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's become a burden. The maintenance costs are astronomical, the taxes keep going up, and honestly, it's too much space for just one person. We think you should sell it." I felt like he'd slapped me. That apartment wasn't just property, it was the culmination of everything Freddie and I had built together. Every room held memories of our life, our dreams, our sacrifices. The idea of selling it felt like betraying everything we'd worked for. "That apartment is my home," I said quietly. "Your father and I bought it together. I'm not ready to give it up." "I know it has sentimental value," Leo said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made me feel small. "But you have to be practical. You could sell it for well over $1 million and buy something smaller, more manageable. You'd have money left over for your retirement." "I don't need money for my retirement," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have plenty of money. I have businesses, investments, savings. I don't need to sell my home." Leo's jaw tightened. "Mom, I think you're being emotional about this. Victoria and I have run the numbers, and it just makes sense. You're almost 60. You should be thinking about simplifying your life, not hanging on to properties that are more trouble than they're worth." The way he said "Victoria and I" made everything clear. This wasn't my son's idea, this was hers. She'd convinced him that his aging mother was a burden, that my attachment to the home Freddie and I had built was foolish and impractical. "I'm not selling," I said firmly. "That's final." Leo sighed, and for the first time, I saw a flash of something ugly in his expression. "Mom, I'm trying to help you here. But if you're not going to be reasonable, I might have to make some decisions for your own good." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that my son had changed into someone I didn't recognize. "It means," he said, sliding the folder across the table, "that I have power of attorney for your financial affairs. If I determine that you're not making sound decisions, I can act on your behalf." The words hit me like a physical blow. I opened the folder and saw legal documents that I'd signed months earlier, documents that Leo had presented as simple estate planning tools. Documents that, I now realized, gave him far more control over my life than I'd ever intended. "You're my son," I whispered. "How can you do this to me?" For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation that Victoria had taught him. "I'm doing this because I love you," he said, but his voice was flat, rehearsed. "Even if you can't see it now, someday you'll understand that this was the right choice." I left the restaurant in a daze. For the first time since Freddie's death, I felt truly alone. My son, the person I'd devoted my life to protecting and providing for, was prepared to use legal documents to steal my home from me. But I wasn't helpless. Not yet. That night, I sat in the apartment that Leo wanted to take away from me and thought about Freddie. He'd always been the more strategic thinker between us, the one who planned for contingencies and never put all his eggs in one basket. "Never show all your cards at once, Jackie," he used to say. "Keep something in reserve, because you never know when you'll need it." I'd followed his advice better than I'd realized. Yes, Leo had access to most of my assets, but not all of them. There were accounts he didn't know about, investments I'd made independently, safety nets that I'd maintained out of habit rather than suspicion. I wasn't as helpless as my son believed. But I was about to learn just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. 3 weeks after that awful lunch, I came home from a client meeting to find Leo and Victoria waiting in my apartment. They'd let themselves in using the spare key I'd given Leo years earlier, and they were sitting in my living room like they owned the place. Which, I was about to learn, they believed they did. "Mom," Leo said, standing up as I entered. He was holding a manila envelope, and Victoria was sitting primly on the couch with a satisfied smile that made my skin crawl. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked, though I already knew this conversation would be terrible. "About the apartment," Victoria said, speaking for the first time. "We've found a buyer." The words hit me like a physical blow. "A buyer?" "I told you I'm not selling." "You don't have a choice," Leo said, and his voice was completely cold now. "I have power of attorney, and I've determined that selling is in your best interest. The papers are already signed." He held out the envelope, and with trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were documents showing that my apartment, the home that Freddie and I had sacrificed everything to buy, had been sold to a property development company for $1.2 million. "You can't do this," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew that legally, he could. The power of attorney documents I'd signed gave him the right to make financial decisions if he determined I was incapable of making them myself. "It's already done," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "The closing is next week. You'll need to be out by the end of the month." "Out?" I stared at them both. "Where am I supposed to go?" Leo reached into his jacket and pulled out a check. "We've thought about that too. Here's $10,000. That should be enough to rent a nice little room somewhere, maybe in Queens or Brooklyn. Somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." $10,000. Out of $1.2 million. For the woman who had given her entire life to making sure he had everything he needed. "This is my home," I said, my voice breaking. "I raised you in this apartment. Your father and I built our entire life here. You can't just throw me out." "Mom, you're being dramatic," Leo said, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "This is a good thing. You'll have a fresh start, somewhere smaller and easier to manage. And we'll make sure you're taken care of." "With $10,000? I asked, holding up the check. "This is what 30 years of sacrifice is worth to you." Victoria leaned forward, her mask of sympathy disappearing entirely. "Jacqueline, you need to understand something. Leo has been supporting you for years. The apartment, the business investments, all of it has been managed by him. You haven't contributed anything meaningful to this family's wealth in a very long time." The lies came so easily to her that I almost believed them myself. But I knew the truth. I knew that my accounting business was still profitable, that my investments were still growing, that I'd been supporting myself and contributing to our family's wealth long before Leo was born. "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to myself. "Isn't it?" Victoria continued. "When was the last time you brought in a significant client? When was the last time you made a financial decision that actually benefited the family? You've been coasting on what you and Freddie built decades ago, and now it's time to face reality." Leo said nothing. He just sat there, letting his wife destroy me with words while he avoided eye contact. "I built this life," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I worked 80-hour weeks to buy this apartment. I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities one never had. I trusted you with my life's work, and this is how you repay me." "You did your job as a mother," Victoria said coldly. "But that job is over. Leo is a grown man with his own family to think about. You can't expect him to carry you forever. Carry me." I stood up, anger finally overwhelming the hurt. "I've never needed anyone to carry me. I've been taking care of myself since I was 18 years old." "Then prove it," Victoria said, standing as well. "Take the money and start over. Show us that you're as capable as you claim to be." It was a challenge, and we all knew it. She was betting that I was too old, too broken, too dependent on my son to survive without him. She was betting that I'd crumble under the pressure and come crawling back, grateful for whatever scraps they decided to throw me. Fine, I said, my voice steady for the first time since they'd arrived. I'll take your money. But I want you both to understand something. This is the last time you'll ever see me ask for anything from either of you. Leo finally spoke. Mom, don't be like this. We're trying to help you. Help me. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've stolen my home, insulted my contributions to this family, and offered me $10,000 to disappear. If this is your idea of help, I'd hate to see what you consider cruelty. You're being emotional, Victoria said dismissively. In a few months, when you've had time to adjust, you'll realize we did the right thing. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The boy I'd raised, the young man I'd been proud of, was gone. In his place was someone who could sit in the home his parents had built and calmly discuss throwing his mother out onto the street. I have one question, I said to Leo. Did you ever love me? Even a little? For a moment, his composure cracked. Of course I love you, Mom. That's why. No, I interrupted. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't steal and lie and betray. What you're doing isn't love. It's greed. Think whatever you want, Victoria said. But the apartment is sold, and you need to be out by the end of the month. That's reality. They left me there, sitting in my living room with a check for $10,000 and 30 days to figure out how to rebuild my life. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have called a lawyer and fought the sale. Instead, I sat quietly and remembered something Freddie had told me years ago. The best revenge, he'd said, is success. When someone tries to destroy you, don't waste time on anger. Use that energy to build something better. I'd been angry for exactly 10 minutes. Now, it was time to build something better. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through every financial document in my apartment, every bank statement, every investment record, every piece of paper that might be relevant to my situation. I needed to understand exactly what Leo had control over and, more importantly, what he didn't. The picture that emerged was both worse and better than I'd feared. Leo had indeed gained control over most of my assets. The joint accounts we'd opened held the majority of my liquid savings. The properties that Freddie and I had accumulated over the years were now under his management. The business accounts for the property management company were in his name. But Freddie's voice echoed in my memory, never put all your eggs in one basket, Jackie. I'd followed his advice better than I'd realized. There were accounts that Leo had never known about, investments I'd made independently over the years, and assets that I'd kept separate out of habit rather than suspicion. My personal accounting business, for instance, was still entirely in my name. Leo had never shown interest in it, dismissing it as small-time compared to his work at Victoria's father's investment firm. The business had a dedicated bank account, a client list built over decades, and a reputation for reliability that couldn't be easily transferred. More importantly, there were investments that I'd made with money from my accounting business, investments that Leo had never known about because I'd wanted to maintain some financial independence even within our partnership. Over the years, I'd quietly purchased several small rental properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. Nothing fancy, just modest apartments and small houses that I'd bought, renovated, and rented out. The income from these properties went into a separate account that I'd use for personal expenses and additional investments. I'd also been contributing to investment accounts that were entirely in my name. Not large amounts, but consistent contributions over 20 years that had grown into substantial nest eggs. Retirement accounts, mutual funds, even some individual stocks that I'd purchased based on my own research. The total wasn't enough to replace everything Leo had stolen, but it was enough to survive. More than survive, if I was careful and strategic, it was enough to start over. But there was something else, something that made me smile for the first time in days. 3 years earlier, I'd made what Leo had called a sentimental investment. A small tech company run by a young woman named Sarah Chin had approached me for accounting services. She couldn't afford to pay much, but she was brilliant, passionate, and reminded me of myself at that age. "I can't pay you what you're worth," she'd said honestly. "But I can give you equity in the company instead." Most accountants would have passed on the deal. But something about Sarah's pitch had intrigued me. Her company was developing software to help small businesses manage their finances more efficiently, exactly the kind of tool I wished I'd had when I was starting out. Leo had rolled his eyes when I told him about the investment. "Mom, you're not a venture capitalist. You're an accountant. Stick to what you know." But I'd believed in Sarah and her vision. Over the next 3 years, I'd continued to provide accounting services in exchange for additional equity. I'd also invested some of my personal money into the company's growth, supporting them through the lean early years. Last month, Sarah had called to tell me that a major software company wanted to acquire her business. The offer was substantial, enough to make all the early investors very wealthy. "Jacqueline," she'd said, "I know you took a chance on me when no one else would. This deal is going to change your life." The paperwork was still being finalized, but my equity stake would be worth approximately $800,000. Money that Leo had no idea existed. I called Sarah that morning. "Jacqueline," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "I was just thinking about you. The acquisition should be final within the next 2 weeks. Are you ready to be rich?" "Sarah," I said, "I need to ask you for a favor. When the deal goes through, I need the money to be deposited into a specific account. And I need you to be very discreet about it." "Of course," she said immediately. "Is everything okay?" "It will be," I promised. "It will be." The next 2 weeks were surreal. I went through the motions of packing my belongings, sorting through 30 years of memories and deciding what could fit in whatever small space I'd be moving to. Leo stopped by twice, both times with Victoria, both times to check on my progress and make sure I was handling the transition well. "You seem to be taking this better than we expected," Victoria observed during their second visit, eyeing the boxes stacked neatly in my living room. "What choice do I have?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "You've made it clear that this is happening whether I like it or not." "That's a healthy attitude," Leo said, but he looked uncomfortable. "Mom, I want you to know that this isn't personal. It's just business." "Of course it is," I agreed. "Everything with you is business now." He flinched slightly at that, but Victoria squeezed his arm and he straightened up. "We found a nice little efficiency apartment in Queens," she said. "It's in a decent neighborhood, and the rent is very reasonable. You should be able to afford it easily with your Social Security and the money we're giving you." "How thoughtful," I said. They left convinced that I was broken, defeated, and grateful for their generosity. I let them believe it. The day before I was supposed to move out, Sarah called. "It's done," she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "The deal went through. $850,000, deposited into the account you specified. Jacqueline, you're officially wealthy." I thanked her calmly, hung up the phone, and sat in my empty apartment for a long moment. Tomorrow, I would leave the home that Freddie and I had built together. But I wouldn't be leaving as the broken, defeated woman my son expected. I would be leaving as someone with nearly $1 million and a plan for revenge. The efficiency apartment in Queens was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. One room with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The building smelled like disinfectant and despair, and the walls were so thin I could hear every conversation, argument, and television program in the neighboring units. I'd been there for exactly 3 days when Leo called. "Mom, how are you settling in?" he asked, his voice carrying forced cheerfulness. "Fine," I said, sitting on the narrow bed that served as both my sleeping area and my living room. "It's an adjustment, but I'm managing." "Good, good," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I was thinking maybe Victoria and I could take you out to dinner this weekend. Help you get acclimated to the neighborhood." "That's not necessary," I said. "I'm sure you're both very busy." "We're never too busy for you, Mom," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. I declined the dinner invitation politely and hung up. 20 minutes later, I was in a taxi heading to the airport. I'd spent the 3 days in Queens making arrangements. I'd closed the remaining accounts that Leo didn't have access to, transferred my accounting business to a virtual model that I could operate from anywhere, and purchased a one-way ticket to a place where I could disappear completely. Costa Rica had always appealed to me. Freddie and I had talked about visiting someday, maybe even retiring there. The cost of living was reasonable, the weather was perfect, and it was far enough away that I could start over without constantly looking over my shoulder. More importantly, it was a place where I could plan my next moves without interference. The flight to San Jose was the first time I'd felt truly free in months. As the plane lifted off from JFK, I looked down at the city where I'd spent my entire life and felt nothing but relief. I was leaving behind everything I'd built, but I was also leaving behind the people who'd betrayed me. I'd done my research carefully. Costa Rica welcomed retirees with open arms, especially those who could demonstrate financial stability. My investment income and the money from Sarah's company's sale would allow me to live comfortably while I figured out my next steps. I rented a small house in a quiet neighborhood about an hour outside San Jose. Nothing fancy, but it had a garden, a view of the mountains, and most importantly, privacy. For the first time in months, I could think clearly without the constant stress of dealing with Leo and Victoria. I'd been there for 2 weeks when Leo called again. "Mom, I stopped by your apartment and the landlord said you haven't been seen in days. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, sitting on my new porch with a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise over the mountains. "I decided to take a little trip." "A trip?" His voice was sharp with concern. "Where?" "You didn't mention anything about a trip." "I didn't realize I needed your permission," I said mildly. "Of course you don't need my permission," he said quickly. "I just worry about you traveling alone. You're not exactly young anymore, and if something happened." "Nothing's going to happen," I interrupted. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "How long will you be gone?" he asked. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "I'm enjoying myself here." "Here? Where exactly are you?" "Does it matter?" I asked. "You made it clear that I was on my own now." "I'm just taking you at your word." He tried to argue, but I ended the call and turned off my phone. I had work to do. Living in Costa Rica was a revelation. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning without the weight of family drama pressing down on me. I had space to think, to plan, and to remember who I was before I'd become just Leo's mother. I established a routine quickly. Mornings were for running my accounting business, which I'd successfully transitioned to a virtual model. My clients barely noticed the change, and several actually preferred the new system since they could communicate with me more efficiently. Afternoons were for learning Spanish and exploring my new country. I'd always been good with languages, and I found that immersing myself in a new culture was helping me rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant for years. Evenings were for planning. I wasn't just hiding from Leo and Victoria, I was preparing for war. But this wouldn't be a war fought with anger or emotion. This would be a war fought with the tools I knew best: careful planning, strategic thinking, and the kind of patience that comes from understanding that the best revenge is always served cold. The first step was research. I spent hours online, using my knowledge of Leo's business practices and financial habits to piece together a complete picture of what he and Victoria had been doing since they'd stolen my apartment. What I discovered was both predictable and infuriating. They'd sold my apartment to a development company that was planning to convert the entire building into luxury condos. The $1.2 million they'd received was just the beginning. They'd also negotiated a percentage of the profits from the condo sales, which would net them an additional $300,000 over the next 2 years. But they weren't keeping the money. Instead, they were using it to fuel an increasingly lavish lifestyle that was completely unsustainable. Victoria had left her job at the art gallery to pursue her passion for interior design. She'd rented an expensive office space, hired assistants, and was spending enormous amounts of money on marketing and networking events. Her business had exactly 3 clients, all of them friends of her family, and none of them were paying enough to cover her overhead. Leo had left his job at Victoria's father's investment firm to start his own wealth management company. He'd rented office space in the same building as Victoria, hired a small staff, and was spending heavily on technology and equipment. His client list was small but growing, though not nearly fast enough to justify his expenses. They'd also bought a house. Not just any house, a massive, modern monstrosity in the Hamptons that had cost them $2.8 million. The mortgage payments alone were $18,000 per month, and that didn't include property taxes, insurance, maintenance, or the army of staff they'd hired to maintain their new lifestyle. From the outside, they looked successful. They drove expensive cars, wore designer clothes, and threw elaborate parties for their wealthy friends. But I could see the numbers behind the facade, and the numbers told a very different story. They were burning through money at an unsustainable rate. The income from their new businesses wasn't covering their expenses, and they were dipping into the money they'd stolen from me to make up the difference. At their current rate of spending, they'd be broke within 18 months. I could have simply waited for them to self-destruct. But that felt too passive, too uncertain. I wanted to ensure their downfall, and I wanted them to know that I was the one who'd caused it. The second step was building my own foundation. I couldn't strike at them effectively if I was vulnerable myself. So I spent my first month in Costa Rica creating a financial fortress that would protect me no matter what happened. I incorporated a small business in Costa Rica, which would serve as the base for my operations. I opened bank accounts in multiple countries, spreading my assets to make them difficult to trace or freeze. I invested in a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate that would provide steady income regardless of what markets did. Most importantly, I began building a network of contacts who could help me when the time came. Lawyers, accountants, private investigators, and business consultants, all people who specialized in exactly the kind of financial warfare I was planning. It took time, but I was in no hurry. Leo and Victoria thought I was a broken old woman hiding in some efficiency apartment in Queens. They had no idea that I was methodically building the weapons I'd need to destroy them. The third step was the most satisfying. I began acquiring the tools of their destruction. Leo's new wealth management company was vulnerable in ways he didn't understand. He'd been sloppy about regulatory compliance, cutting corners to save money and speed up his launch. A few anonymous tips to the Securities and Exchange Commission would trigger investigations that would tie up his business for months. Victoria's interior design business was even more vulnerable. She'd been making promises to clients that she couldn't keep, using their deposits to fund her lifestyle while delivering substandard work. A few carefully placed reviews and complaints would destroy her reputation in the tight-knit world of high-end interior design. But those were just the opening moves. The real attack would come from a direction they'd never expect. The house in the Hamptons was the key to everything. They'd stretched themselves financially to buy it, using every penny of credit they could access. The mortgage was adjustable rate, which meant their payments would increase significantly over the next 2 years. They'd also taken out a second mortgage to fund their business ventures, putting the house itself at risk. But the house had one weakness that Leo had overlooked in his eagerness to close the deal. the previous owner had been involved in a complex bankruptcy proceeding, and there were liens against the property that hadn't been fully resolved. I hired a team of lawyers and investigators to dig deeper into the property's history. What they found was a legal nightmare that could potentially invalidate the sale entirely. The previous owner had hidden assets during his bankruptcy, and the house had been sold to pay creditors who might not have had legitimate claims. If the right legal challenges were filed, Leo and Victoria could lose the house without any compensation. They'd be left with massive debts and no asset to show for them. It would take months of careful legal work to make it happen, but I had time. More importantly, I had the resources to hire the best lawyers available. While my legal team worked on the house, I began implementing the smaller attacks on their businesses. Anonymous complaints to regulatory agencies, negative reviews from fake clients, and whispered rumors in the social circles where they were trying to build their reputations. None of it was illegal. All of it was devastating. Leo called me 3 times during my second month in Costa Rica, each time sounding more stressed and confused. "Mom, where are you?" he asked during our last conversation. "I need to know you're safe." "I'm perfectly safe," I assured him. "Why do you sound so worried?" "It's just, work has been challenging lately. Some regulatory issues that we're working through. Nothing serious, but it's been stressful." "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. "You're very smart, after all." "Yeah," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Mom, I've been thinking about what happened with the apartment. Maybe we were too hasty. Maybe we should have talked about it more." "What's done is done," I said. "You made your choice, and I made mine." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I'm learning to live without you," I said simply. "Just like you wanted." He tried to argue, but I ended the call. I had work to do. By my 3rd month in Costa Rica, I'd established a comfortable routine and was beginning to enjoy the process of watching Leo and Victoria's world slowly crumble. The reports I received from my various contacts painted a picture of increasing desperation disguised as continued success. Victoria's interior design business was hemorrhaging money. The complaints I'd orchestrated had reached the ears of potential clients, and word was spreading through the wealthy social circles she'd been trying to penetrate. 2 of her 3 clients had fired her, demanding refunds that she couldn't provide because she'd already spent their deposits. Leo's wealth management firm was facing a full regulatory investigation that was consuming enormous amounts of time and money. He'd been forced to hire expensive lawyers and compliance consultants, and several potential clients had withdrawn their interest after reading about the SEC inquiry in the financial press. But they were still spending money like nothing had changed. The house in the Hamptons was costing them a fortune to maintain, and they were both still living the lifestyle they'd established with my stolen money. I was reviewing the latest reports when my phone rang. Leo's number appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. Our conversations had become increasingly strained, and I could hear the desperation growing in his voice with each call. "Mom," he said as soon as I picked up, "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" I asked, settling back into my chair on the porch. "Do you have any money saved up? Any accounts or investments that might help tide us over during this rough patch?" I almost laughed. After stealing my home and throwing me out with $10,000, he was asking me for money. "I'm afraid not," I said calmly. "You have access to all my accounts, remember? You made sure of that." "I know, but I thought maybe you had something else. Something separate. You were always so careful with money." I agreed. "But you and Victoria made it clear that my financial management was outdated and ineffective. So I stopped trying to manage anything beyond my basic living expenses." "Mom, I'm sorry about how that sounded. We were just trying to help you simplify your life." "And you did," I said. "My life is very simple now." "Where are you?" he asked suddenly. "I mean, really, where are you?" I've been to the apartment in Queens several times, and you're never there. I told you, I'm traveling. For 3 months. Mom, that's not traveling, that's relocating. What aren't you telling me? I could hear panic creeping into his voice. The regulatory investigation was probably getting more serious, and he was starting to realize that his financial cushion wouldn't last forever. I'm not telling you anything because you made it clear that my life is no longer your concern, I said. I'm following your advice and taking care of myself. That's not what I meant, and you know it, he said, his voice rising. I'm still your son. I still care about you. Do you? I asked. Because when you care about someone, you don't steal their home and throw them out with $10,000. We didn't steal anything, he said defensively. We made a sound financial decision on your behalf. And how's that working out for you? I asked. The silence stretched between us. I could almost hear him trying to figure out how to ask me for help without admitting that he'd made a mistake. Mom, he said finally, I think we need to see each other. Face to face. There are things we need to discuss. I don't think so, I said. I'm quite happy where I am. Please, he said, and for the first time in months, I heard a hint of the boy I'd raised. I'm in trouble, and I don't know what to do. What kind of trouble? I asked, though I already knew. The business is struggling. The investigation is costing us everything we have. Victoria is, she's not handling the stress well. And the house payments are killing us. Have you considered selling the house? I asked innocently. We can't, he said quickly. There are some legal complications with the title. Our lawyers are working on it, but it could take months to resolve. I smiled. My legal team was working faster than I'd expected. That sounds difficult, I said. But I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're very resourceful. Mom, I need help. We need help. I know I made mistakes, but I'm asking you to forgive me. We're family. Family, I repeated. Yes, I remember hearing that word before. Right before you sold my home and threw me out. I'm sorry, he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. I'm so sorry. I know I hurt you, and I know I was wrong. Please, just tell me where you are so we can work this out. I felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct, the urge to comfort my child when he was hurting. But then I remembered the coldness in his eyes when he'd handed me that check, the way Victoria had dismissed my contributions to the family, the casual cruelty with which they destroyed my life. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean rescuing you from the consequences of your choices. What does that mean? He asked. It means you made your bed, and now you have to lie in it, I said. Just like you forced me to do. Mom, please. I hung up. That evening, I received a call from my lead lawyer working on the house case. Mrs. Jacqueline, he said, his voice excited. We found something significant. The bankruptcy trustee who sold the house to your son was taking kickbacks from the buyers. The entire sale was fraudulent. What does that mean? I asked. It means we can void the sale entirely. Your son and his wife will lose the house, and they'll be responsible for all the debts they incurred to buy it. It's exactly what you wanted. How long? I asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We just need to file the paperwork and serve them with the documents. Do it, I said. 2 weeks later, Leo called me in a panic. Mom, they're taking the house, he said, his voice breaking. The lawyers say the sale was fraudulent, and we're going to lose everything. $3 million, just gone. That's terrible, I said, though I was smiling. We don't have anywhere to go, he continued. The mortgage company is demanding full payment, and we don't have it. Victoria's family has cut us off. We're going to lose everything. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. Mom, please. I know you're angry, but we need help. We need a place to stay, at least temporarily. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly, I'll pay you back, Leo, I interrupted. Do you remember what you told me when you sold my apartment? Mom, don't. You told me it was time to face reality. You told me I needed to learn to take care of myself. You told me that your job as my son was over, and that I couldn't expect you to carry me forever. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said firmly. You meant every word. And now it's time for you to take your own advice. Where are you? He asked desperately. Please, just tell me where you are. I'm somewhere you can't reach me, I said. I'm somewhere safe, where people who claim to love me can't steal my home and throw me out onto the street. Mom, I love you. I've always loved you. No, I said quietly. You loved what I could give you. You loved my money, my house, my willingness to sacrifice everything for you. But you never loved me. If you had, you never could have done what you did. That's not true, he said, but his voice was hollow. Goodbye, Leo, I said. I hope you learn to love yourself more than you love money. It's the only way you'll ever be truly happy. I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over the mountains, and felt truly at peace for the first time in months. 6 months after I'd left New York, I was thriving in my new life. My accounting business was more profitable than ever, thanks to clients who appreciated my attention to detail and personal service. I'd made friends in the expatriate community, learned to salsa dance, and was studying Spanish with a passion I hadn't felt for anything in years. More importantly, I'd found myself again. The woman who had built a business from nothing, who had fought for everything she'd achieved, who had survived loss and betrayal and emerged stronger. That woman had been buried under years of trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect widow, the perfect victim. Now she was free. My phone had been turned off for weeks, but I turned it on periodically to check messages. There were dozens of increasingly frantic calls from Leo, a few from Victoria, and even some from people I didn't recognize who claimed to be representing my family's interests. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on the final phase of my plan. Leo and Victoria had lost their house, their businesses were failing, and they were facing financial ruin. But I wanted them to understand exactly who had orchestrated their downfall. I hired a private investigator to document their current situation. The reports made for fascinating reading. They'd been forced to move in with Victoria's parents, a humiliating blow to their pride that had strained their marriage to the breaking point. Victoria blamed Leo for their financial disasters, while Leo blamed the mysterious forces that seemed to be working against them. Leo had been forced to take a job at a small accounting firm, working for a fraction of the salary he'd been earning at Victoria's father's company. Victoria had given up her interior design dreams and was working as a sales associate at a high-end furniture store. They were broke, desperate, and finally beginning to understand what it felt like to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted. It was time for the final revelation. I composed a letter and had it delivered to their current address by a courier service. I wanted them to know exactly who was responsible for their downfall, and I wanted them to understand that it had been planned from the beginning. The letter was simple. Dear Leo and Victoria. By now, you've probably figured out that your recent financial troubles weren't just bad luck. You were right to be suspicious. Every regulatory complaint, every legal challenge, every business failure was orchestrated by someone who understood your weaknesses better than you understood them yourselves. You made one crucial mistake when you decided to steal my home and throw me out with $10,000. You assumed that I was helpless, that I was dependent on you, that I had no resources or capabilities beyond what you could see. You were wrong. The woman you discarded was the same woman who built a business from nothing, who turned a small investment into a fortune, who survived the loss of her husband and raised a son single-handedly. The woman you dismissed as outdated and emotional was the same woman who had been quietly building a financial empire that you never knew existed. The apartment you sold for $1.2 million was the least valuable thing I owned. The businesses you took control of were a fraction of my actual wealth. The $10,000 you gave me was less than I earned in a single day from investments you never knew about. I could have fought you legally from the beginning. I could have had your power of attorney revoked, could have stopped the sale, could have destroyed you immediately. But I chose a different path. I chose to let you believe you had won, to let you get comfortable with your stolen wealth, to let you build a lifestyle that depended on money that was never really yours. And then I chose to take it all away. The house you lost was lost because I hired the best lawyers money could buy to expose the fraudulent sale. The businesses you built failed because I knew exactly how to attack their weak points. The regulatory investigations, the client complaints, the social media reviews, all of it was my doing. You wanted to teach me about reality. Consider this your education. I'm not writing this letter to gloat or to hurt you further. I'm writing it because I want you to understand something important: actions have consequences. When you betray someone who loves you, when you steal from someone who trusted you, when you discard someone who devoted their life to you, there are consequences. I hope you learn from this experience. I hope you discover that happiness doesn't come from money or status or the approval of people who don't really know you. I hope you learn to value the people who love you before they decide to stop loving you back. I won't be returning to New York. I won't be rescuing you from your current situation. I won't be available to provide emotional or financial support. You made it clear that you didn't want or need me in your life, and I'm simply honoring that choice. I'm not your enemy, Leo. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just someone who learned to love herself more than she loved the people who betrayed her. I hope someday you understand the difference. Goodbye. Mom. I sealed the letter and sent it off, then sat back to wait for the response I knew would come. Leo called within hours of receiving the letter. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message later that evening. Mom, his voice was shaking. I got your letter. I don't know what to say. I had no idea. I never meant for things to go this far. Please, can we talk? Can we work this out? I know I made mistakes, but I'm your son. We're family. That has to count for something. There were tears in his voice, and for a moment, I felt the old maternal instinct rising. But then I remembered the coldness in his eyes when he'd handed me that check, and the feeling passed. I deleted the message without responding. 1 year after leaving New York, I was a completely different person. I'd lost 20 pounds, learned to speak Spanish fluently, and had built a social circle of friends who knew nothing about my past except that I was someone who had chosen to start over in a new country. My accounting business was thriving. I'd specialized in helping other expatriates manage their finances, and word of mouth had brought me more clients than I could handle. I'd hired 2 local assistants and was considering expanding into financial planning services. But the real change was internal. I'd rediscovered the woman I'd been before I'd devoted my entire identity to being Leo's mother. I was confident, independent, and genuinely happy for the first time in years. I'd also started dating. His name was Carlos, and he was a retired professor who'd moved to Costa Rica from Spain. He was kind, intelligent, and had absolutely no interest in my money or my past. We spent our evenings talking about books, our weekends exploring the countryside, and our days enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. You seem like someone who's lived a very full life, he'd said during one of our early dates. But you also seem like someone who's just beginning to discover who you really are. He was right. I'd spent so many years being what other people needed me to be that I'd forgotten who I was when I was just being myself. My phone had been silent for months. I'd changed my number and email address, making it impossible for Leo to reach me. But I still received updates from my private investigator, who was monitoring the situation back in New York. Leo and Victoria had divorced. The financial stress and mutual recriminations had destroyed their marriage completely. Victoria had moved back in with her parents and was working as a receptionist at a medical office. Leo had taken a job as a junior accountant at a small firm in New Jersey, living in a studio apartment and taking public transportation to work. They were both struggling, but they were also both working honest jobs and living within their means for the first time in years. In a strange way, losing everything might have been the best thing that ever happened to them. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles. The anger that had driven my revenge was gone, replaced by a kind of sad acceptance. I'd gotten justice, but justice hadn't brought me peace. Peace had come from letting go, from building something new, from learning to love myself again. On the anniversary of the day I'd left New York, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. "Hello," I said. "Mrs. Jacqueline." The voice was young, female, and uncertain. "This is Sarah Chin. I don't know if you remember me, but you were my accountant and investor when I was starting my tech company." "Sarah," I said, genuinely pleased to hear from her. "Of course I remember you. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, thanks to you," she said. "The company's sale changed my life completely. But I'm calling because I have some news that I thought you should know." "What kind of news?" I asked. "I got a call from someone claiming to be your son. He said you disappeared and that he was trying to find you. He wanted to know if I had any information about your whereabouts or your financial situation." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him I couldn't discuss client information with anyone, even family members," she said. "But Mrs. Jacqueline, he seemed really desperate. He was crying on the phone. He said he'd made terrible mistakes and that he needed to talk to you." "Did he say anything else?" I asked. "He said he was sorry. He said he'd learned that you were right about everything, and that he'd spent the last year trying to figure out how to make things right. He said he didn't want your money or your help, he just wanted to apologize and to let you know that he understood what he'd done wrong." I sat quietly for a moment, processing this information. Part of me wanted to believe that Leo had genuinely changed, that losing everything had taught him the lessons I'd hoped it would. But another part of me remembered how easily he'd betrayed me when money was involved. "Sarah," I said finally, "if he calls again, you can tell him that I'm safe and happy. You can tell him that I forgive him, and that I hope he's learned to make better choices. But you cannot tell him where I am or how to reach me." "Are you sure?" she asked. He really did sound different. Like he'd genuinely changed. "Maybe he has," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean exposing yourself to being hurt again." "I understand," she said. "I'll give him your message if he calls back." "Thank you," I said. "And Sarah, thank you for everything. Your success made my new life possible. You took a chance on me when no one else would," she said. "I'm just glad I could help you take a chance on yourself." After I hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about Leo's call to Sarah. Part of me wanted to believe that he had truly changed, that losing everything had taught him the value of family and integrity. But I also knew that people usually only change when they have no other choice, and that true change takes time to prove itself. I decided to give him that time. If he had genuinely learned from his mistakes, if he had truly changed, then maybe someday we could have a relationship again. But it would be a different relationship, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. In the meantime, I had a life to live. A good life, a happy life, a life that I'd built for myself on my own terms. 2 years had passed since I'd left New York, and I'd settled into a rhythm of life that felt both peaceful and purposeful. My accounting business had grown into a small but successful firm. I'd hired 3 local employees and was providing services to expatriates throughout Central America. More importantly, I'd found work that felt meaningful, helping other people who were starting over, just like I had. Carlos and I had grown closer, and he'd asked me to move in with him. We were taking things slowly, both of us being mature enough to know that rushing into anything would be a mistake. But we were happy together, and I was beginning to believe that it might be possible to find love again after 58. I'd also started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping abuse survivors manage their finances and plan for independent futures. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply rewarding. These women reminded me of myself. They'd been betrayed by people they trusted, and they were learning to rebuild their lives from nothing. "You have a gift for this," Maria, the shelter director, told me one afternoon. "You understand what it's like to have everything taken away and to find the strength to start over." "I suppose I do," I said. Though I wouldn't have chosen to learn that lesson. "None of us would," she said. "But sometimes the worst experiences teach us the most important things about ourselves." She was right. Losing my home and my relationship with Leo had been devastating, but it had also forced me to rediscover who I was when I wasn't trying to be everything to everyone else. My phone had been quiet for months, but I still received periodic updates from my private investigator. Leo had been working steadily at the accounting firm, had moved to a better apartment, and seemed to be building a stable, if modest, life for himself. Victoria had remarried, a wealthy older man who could provide the lifestyle she'd always wanted. More interestingly, Leo had started volunteering at a financial literacy program for low-income families. He was teaching basic budgeting and investment principles to people who reminded me of Freddie and me in our early years, hardworking people who just needed guidance to build something better. "He seems to have found his purpose," my investigator reported. "The people at the program say he's patient, knowledgeable, and genuinely cares about helping others succeed." Maybe he really had changed. Maybe losing everything had taught him the same lessons it had taught me, that money without integrity is worthless, that relationships built on greed are doomed to fail, and that the most important thing you can do is help others rather than exploit them. I was thinking about this when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but it had a New York area code. "Hello," I said, curious despite myself. "Mrs. Jacqueline." The voice was hesitant, respectful. "This is Tom Bradley. I'm a lawyer representing your son, Leo. He's asked me to contact you because he has something he'd like to share with you." "What kind of something?" I asked, immediately suspicious. "He's filed a lawsuit against the development company that bought your apartment," the lawyer said. "He's discovered that they committed fraud in the transaction, and he's trying to get the sale reversed." "Why would he do that?" I asked. "Because he wants to give you back your home," the lawyer said simply. "He says it was stolen from you, and he wants to make it right." I sat quietly for a moment, processing this information. Leo was suing to get back an apartment he'd sold, trying to return something he'd stolen from me. If he succeeded, he'd be giving up over $1 million that he could have kept. "What does he want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," the lawyer said. "He just wants you to know that he's trying to fix what he broke. He said to tell you that he doesn't expect forgiveness, and he doesn't expect you to contact him. He just wants you to know that he understands what he did wrong, and he's trying to make it right." "How do I know this isn't just another scheme?" I asked. "Because he's paying for the lawsuit himself," the lawyer said. "It's going to cost him tens of thousands of dollars, and even if he wins, he won't get any of the money. It would all go to you." After I hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about this development. Leo was spending his own money to try to return something he'd stolen from me. He wasn't asking for anything in return, wasn't trying to use this as a way to re-establish contact, wasn't expecting any reward for his actions. It was exactly the kind of gesture that the old Leo, the boy I'd raised before greed and Victoria's influence had changed him, would have made. I decided to have my own lawyer investigate the lawsuit. What I learned was even more impressive than what Tom Bradley had told me. Leo had hired a team of forensic accountants and legal experts to examine every aspect of the apartment sale. He discovered that the development company had been engaged in a pattern of fraud, targeting elderly property owners and using various schemes to acquire their assets below market value. The lawsuit wasn't just about my apartment, it was about dozens of similar transactions that had defrauded other families. If Leo succeeded, he'd be exposing a criminal enterprise that had stolen millions of dollars from vulnerable people. "Your son has put together one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've ever seen," my lawyer reported. "If he wins, it will shut down the entire operation and help a lot of people get their property back." "What are his chances of winning?" I asked. "Very good," she said. "He's done excellent work, and he's clearly passionate about the case. But it's going to take years and cost him a fortune in legal fees. And he's doing this without expecting anything in return." I asked. "As far as I can tell, yes," she said. "He's not even trying to contact you directly. He's just doing the work and hoping that someday you'll know that he tried to make things right." I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Tom Bradley. "Mr. Bradley," I said when he answered, "this is Jacqueline. I want to help with the lawsuit." "Mrs. Jacqueline," he said, sounding shocked. Leo specifically asked me not to contact you again. He said he didn't want you to feel pressured to respond." "I'm not responding because I feel pressured," I said. "I'm responding because what you're doing is right. These people stole from a lot of families, and they should be held accountable." "Does this mean you want to see Leo?" he asked hopefully. "No," I said firmly. "I want to help with the lawsuit because it's the right thing to do. But I'm not ready to have a relationship with him again. Maybe someday, but not now." "I understand," he said. "He'll be grateful for any help you can provide." "Don't tell him it's coming from me," I said. "Just let him know that someone who cares about justice is supporting his work." Over the next year, I provided financial support for the lawsuit while maintaining my anonymity. I also used my contacts in the business world to help Leo's team gather evidence and build their case. The lawsuit was successful beyond anyone's expectations. The development company was shut down, its executives were arrested, and dozens of families received compensation for their stolen property. Leo had managed to expose a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. My apartment was returned to me, along with damages for the years I'd been unable to live there. The total settlement was over $2 million, more than the apartment had been worth when Leo sold it. But the money wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that Leo had spent 2 years of his life and most of his savings trying to undo the harm he'd caused. He hadn't done it for recognition or reward, he'd done it because it was right. Maybe, I thought, it was time to see him again. Not as the mother who had been betrayed, but as the woman who had survived, and as the mother of a man who had finally learned the value of integrity. I stood outside a small cafe in New York, 2 blocks from my old apartment, the building that was now legally mine again. The city felt both familiar and distant, like a place I'd once loved but had learned to live without. Yet today, something pulled me back, not to reclaim the past, but to acknowledge how far we'd both come. Leo was already waiting when I walked in. He looked older, humbled, but there was a light in his eyes I hadn't seen in years, the light of someone who'd fought hard for something that mattered. He stood up, unsure, hesitant. "Mom." I raised my hand gently. "Let me go first." He nodded, sitting down. "I didn't come here for apologies," I said, my voice steady. "I've heard enough of those in my lifetime. I came here because I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you. I'm proud of what you did." His throat worked as he swallowed, emotion flashing across his face. I didn't do it for you to forgive me. I know, I said. That's why it matters. We talked for hours. About the case, about the families he'd helped, about the mistakes we'd both made. I didn't promise to rebuild what we'd lost. Some wounds take time to fully heal, but I made one thing clear. He was no longer the man who'd handed me a $10,000 check and turned his back on his own mother. He was a man who stood up when it counted, even when no one was watching. Weeks later, I returned to Central America, to my quiet life, my work, and to Carlos, who'd become my safe harbor in the storm. I didn't need New York anymore. I didn't need the apartment. I didn't even need the money. But it felt good to know that justice had been served. And it felt even better to know that my son had finally learned the one lesson I'd always hoped he would. True wealth comes from doing what's right, even when no one is keeping score. For the first time in years, I felt peace. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to call him my son again. The end.